I'm Kim, and welcome to Esotouric's podcast, You Can't Eat the Sunshine, for the week of February 9th, 2015. Our focus this week is on The Trails, a legendary Western-themed Route 66 roadhouse that operated in Duarte, California from 1952 to 2001. We talk with Duarte city planner Jason Golding, who shares colorful memories of his first job as a Trails busboy. And we also visit with Larry Moon, co-owner of Pasadena's Dino Computers, founded by his father-in-law, Sal Cordaro, famed throughout the San Gabriel Valley as the longtime organist in the Trails Lounge. So stay tuned.
You can't eat the sunshine, but you can make a beeline for the best of the coastline. La 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 la. Skid Row, Solano Canyon, the Doria, and Pico Union, the long-lost neighborhood called Hermina, between South Pass and Highland Park, Grand Central Park. It is divine. You can't eat the sunshine, but it's a gold mine of fabulous oddities like Rouge, Snary, Angela Savvy, Bob's Big Boy, in Downey Forest Lawn Cemetery. You can't eat the sunshine, but make a beeline for la la la. You can't eat the sunshine.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for listening to our podcast, You Can't Eat the Sunshine, for the week of February 9th, 2015. Two guests this week, as always, Jason Golding. Jason is a city planner with the city of Duarte, former employee at the Trails Restaurant, hence this week's theme, the former Trails Restaurant on Old Route 66 in Duarte. Second guest, Larry Moon. The Larry Moon interview is, well, the interview with Jason is why we exist, because we get into some really good stuff with him about residential, commercial precedents on Old Route 66 pre-war. The Larry interview is why we do this, because it's the overarching abstraction connection. Larry Moon is co-owner with his wife Diana of Dino Computers in Pasadena. Dino Computers was founded by Diana's father, Sal Cordaro. Sal was the organist at the Trails Restaurant for about 30 years. Okay, and this is how we bring this stuff all together. Kim, you're looking at me funny and mouthing things, and I can't tell what you're saying.
Because you're saying Saul as if he was an old Jewish fellow, and his name's Sal. He's
Sal.
Yeah. And I think there's another owner. There's a sister involved too.
Yeah, they're
You're just excited.
I'm excited. Sal Cordaro. Okay, so we're going to get into this. We're going to get into all of this. And Kim, you're the Pishka maven.
I am, and apparently we're on a Yiddish kick, so let's get into this whole Pishka.
Right, it's the I'm thinking of the Pishka, and I'm just like...
I don't know what you're thinking of. You're really upset that we've been shopping at Dino Computers for, 10 years, and we had no idea that the owner, Sal, who I guess isn't around much. I don't know that I ever saw Sal, but that he was not just the first Apple dealer in California, which is pretty freaking cool, but he was also the organist of the Trails, all of which will be revealed. As for this Pishka business, thanks for reminding me, there is a digital tip jar. It's associated with this podcast, and if you like what we do and you'd like to be supportive thereof, we certainly appreciate the contributions from listeners, which help us travel around the Southland looking for fascinating people to talk to for you to listen to. You can find that PayPal donation page on any of the podcast pages, and we are always grateful for your support, never obligatory, always very much appreciated.
Thank you, Kim. Good job. So let's get into some closely watched trains. This is always my favorite portion of the podcast introduction, because it lets us let our hair down and just sort of let everyone know where our mind is going in terms of what's in the what's coming through the channel, right? Okay, so Kim, I'll start with I'll just do the first one and we can just move on. This is just calling this out. Vidiot's video store in Santa Monica will stay open. I know we talked about this last week. There's some concern. Megan Ellison, who's a very famous television and film producer and a longtime longtime patron herself, and another longtime patron, a local doctor. They've made contributions, and they've indicated that the store will remain open if they can help it. So thanks to them for helping it. And I'm Vidiot's member number 4. I took 5. Oh, Jim Hosney's number 4. I'm 5. So we went. So the day Vidiot's opened, school let out at 3:15. I was a senior in high school, and so Jim Hosney, my film teacher, and I drove over to Vidiot's, and we both got membership cards. And he was number 5, and he was number 4, and I was number 5. And since Vidiot's computerized their inventory and customer base, my number is no longer 00004. It's some 00005. It's some random series of numbers that the computer assigned.
Yes, and you're so upset about that. You actually don't rent videos there anymore, but I think that's okay. That's a good reason.
I live in El Sereno. I don't rent videos in Santa Monica, but I do have somewhere in one of my 3 boxes of stuff. I do have my wallet when I was in high school with my Vidiot's card in it.
We'll find that.
So, Kim, closely watched train number 2. A plaque was put up in the Spring Street Park, and I'm going to let you do the heavy lifting on this one.
Yeah, it's super sad and upsetting. We used to run the Downtown Art Walk. We put it into a nonprofit. Some of you have been following along with us all this time, and you know this. But for those who are new to the Kim and Richard show, we were asked to take over management of the Art Walk when it was just starting to explode. We were getting about 3,000 people a month, and we'd been doing free shuttle bus curation. It was really, really fun, and we were excited about the activation of public space and historic sites downtown. And although we knew it was going to be a ton of work, we agreed to do this thing. And unfortunately, we sought to put a board together of people who were all across the downtown community. And it ended up being a really awful, sabotagey board that, did all sorts of sneaky stuff behind our backs. And the end result was, after 2 meetings with the board and getting them to vote on a plan for what the Art Walk was going to be, they asked us to stop being in charge but continue managing it for free, kind of in the background. We decided...
We'd already been doing it for free.
Well, we'd been doing it for free, but they didn't want us to actually be in charge, but to continue running it. We said no to that. That's when, Richard, you coined the phrase, I think we can do more good off this board than on it. And off we went.
I was quoting.
You were quoting?
Yeah, I was quoting someone. I was quoting someone who will remain unnamed.
Yeah. In any case, it was super complicated, upsetting, and we were obviously still really concerned about this event that we had spent so much energy promoting and coddling for over a year. And then we watched the thing just spin out of control because all of the energy of the Art Walk still existed and more people were coming. It was like 10,000 people. And the plan that had been voted in, which was for Art Walk to decentralize. And in our last few months of running it, we'd actually been running the official Art Walk walking tours and map station out of Clifton's cafeteria, which was great because the sidewalks on Broadway are huge and there were fewer people over there, and it would just really work to get people away from the core, decentralized, which we were asked to do by the LAPD. And we had performers in the Spring Arcade. You can find video of that on our YouTube channel. We were worried. I was spending a lot of time kind of monitoring what was happening, and sure enough, the crowds got out of control. The food trucks were coming. Parking was an issue.
They were just circling around 4th and Spring. They weren't leaving.
Richard, you're not talking anywhere near.
They were. The point was that Art Walk was just staying in the same footprint.
Yeah.
4th and Main, 4th and Spring. It wasn't diversifying, which was an issue that had been identified years earlier.
Right, but when we got pushed out, there were forces that wanted to keep Art Walk at 4th and Main, wanted 4th and Main to be a really important corner. You can fill in the blanks there yourself. So, end result, to everyone's horror, and especially to Richard's and mine, because we just kept thinking, we tried, what could we have done differently? And you can't fix everything. At an Art Walk about a year after we left, a young man was driving someone else's Cadillac, didn't really know how to drive, was driving barefoot, saw a parking space on Spring Street on the left side, right in front of the El Dorado Hotel. and the Spring Street Park, tried to gun into the parking spot, didn't want to back in because I'm sure they were afraid someone else was going to get the spot because that's how crazy Art Walk was. Drove up over the curb and just in a perfect storm of horror knocked over a parking meter onto a baby stroller and killed a 2-month-old boy named Marcelo Vasquez. And it was like the worst thing you could possibly imagine. Anyway, of course, the Vasquez family was horrified and bereft and everything you can imagine. Ultimately, they ended up suing the city and also the Art Walk. And the city formed a Art Walk task force to deal with the overcrowding, the food trucks. Art Walk has really never been the same. They managed to kind of strip all the life out of it by legislating what sort of uses the streets could have. And finally, it never went to trial. We were kind of waiting to see if we might get called in to testify because, of course, we were involved in these conversations with the Art Walk board about how Art Walk could be safer and decentralized. They settled. It sounds like they got about $500,000 for the loss of their child, and a condition of the settlement was that a memorial plaque be erected in the Spring Street Park, which I have to point out is where the Art Walk was officially handing out maps that night. So a lovely little plaque was created by one of the Art Walk artists who responded to the sadness of the loss of this child at the time. There were a lot of memorials happening in the galleries, and so it's a little colored drawing of this baby in angel wings, and there's some footage of the family now with their 2 younger children, which is nice to see that they have moved on with their lives, and they seem at peace with what's happened as much as you can be. They said that they're glad that their child will always be remembered there and that it means something, that the city acknowledges that something terrible happened and that there's some responsibility. So, R.I.P. little Marcelo Vasquez. Anyone who goes into that park can go and see his little memorial next to the child's play area.
Baruch Hashem. Thank you, Kim. Kim, Broadway is still on our minds. We were down on Broadway weekend last. The Delagianis opened up the theaters under their aegis. The Tower, the Los Angeles, the Palace, and...
No, the State wasn't open.
The State wasn't open. Yeah, they didn't open the State. And then the Ace opened, the United Artists. And so we wandered around, and you wrote a nice... I have a lot of mixed feelings about this. It's good to see that the model we put forth and implemented as long as we were in charge of Art Walk is the model they used on Broadway. It's nice to see 6 years later that that's exactly what we were doing.
And when you say the model, you mean opening spaces up for free performances, giving artists an opportunity to paint on the street, dancing, all kinds of creative activities, just allowing the city to be used in some kind of atypical ways and inviting the public to come down and witness that.
Right. So we went to that, and you wrote a nice essay about it in your newsletter, and I'll let you mention that. And then there's still a lot to talk about in other parts of Broadway, so I don't want to get bogged down.
Yeah, what I ended up writing about for the newsletter was just the sort of bittersweet quality of it. It was about a 5-hour window when Broadway was engaged in this particular night on Broadway event, and they closed the streets at 5 sharp, and this thing ended at 10, and people were rushing around to try to see inside of all of the theaters to try to catch the performances that were in their date books, things that they were excited about, and to get something to eat while they were at it. And as we were wandering around with Gordon Pattison, Bunker Hill native, who remembered Broadway when it was alive, just couldn't help feel kind of troubled that all these performers were getting onto these stages and getting to, do their thing in front of a crowd down in the heart of the city. But if any one of them wanted to call the Delagianis on Monday morning and ask about renting the theater for a couple of weeks to do a short run, the answer would almost certainly be no. I mean, all of these great buildings are not really available for the use that they were intended for. I mean, yes, big motion picture screenings just don't exist anymore, but some of these theaters were built as combination stage cinema theaters, and there's just no way to use these spaces until the owners decide that, they're not going to wait for the next big filming paycheck. And I think what I didn't really say it in the newsletter, but what Broadway needs more than anything is some good nonprofit-run theaters that are actually used. It's the only model that works for these big motion picture palaces, and considering we have the largest collection of them anywhere in the world, it's a National Register theater district. If the city is serious about doing something with its downtown, doing something with Broadway, they're really going to have to pony up and do something akin to what has happened down in San Pedro with the Warner Grand. We need nonprofits running these theaters because landlords are never going to be impresarios. They don't have the vision, and they don't understand how important it is to just let artists make art in creative spaces. That's just not what it's about. And I'm sad that you have to have a really contentious council district election coming up before the resources are expended that allows this kind of energy to come to the street. We need it all the time, not just when there's someone running for election.
Yeah, and the other salient aspect of our evening was the last part of our evening on Broadway, where we sat in a vacant Spring Arcade and just asked ourselves, why wasn't there resources devoted to this in the night on Broadway? This was identified by us in 2007, even when we were just starting to curate Art Walk events as the connector. This is the most important pedestrian shortcut in downtown.
Correct. The Spring Arcade is exquisite. It has a glass roof. It's based on what's the name? Burlington Arcade in London. Where Bertie Wooster bought his shirts. Where Bobby's began, the first privatized police force ever. So it's a very important space for downtown. And, there's a few small businesses in now that the old Latino and Asian vendors have been allowed to expend to the end of their leases. There's Gelateria Uli, and there's a lovely little crepe place, and then down at the end is Guisado's Tacos. They do all right because they're at, street side on Spring, and people can see them. But, it's if you don't tell people it's safe to go into spaces, it's very sad. They just don't. And it really shows how non-organic the events at the Night on Broadway were. I mean, there were stations where people were meant to gather because streets were closed, vendors were set up. Although I did notice one funky little gem vendor and crystal vendor who just set up his own little funky table at pretty much knee level, and I appreciated that. But, it was mostly people who've been invited in, and their locations were very carefully selected. And the fact of the matter is, it's very well known. Joseph Helen, who owns the Spring Arcade, had a very public feud with Jose Huizar, who's now, the councilman who is running for re-election and who organized this event. And I think that, the crepe shop and the gelato shop were punished for that. It's nonsensical that you would activate Broadway and not do something in the Spring Arcade unless you have a problem with the Spring Arcade. And that's too bad, because they shouldn't be so contentious. Everybody cares about Broadway and cares about these beautiful spaces, and we should be down there bringing them to life together without any exclusions.
Thank you, Kim. It also reminds us that St. Vincent's Court is still dead, and we'll just move on. They haven't solved the seating problem on St. Vincent's Court. So the last week there was an article based on a press release by the realty company that purchased the old Hamburger's department store at 8th and Broadway, and this press release, which is what the article is based on, is just a bunch of really great ideas they have about converting this 1 million square foot space of this early 20th century department store into, Kim, I'll let you delineate all of their hopes and dreams.
Well, it's actually a fairly simple list of things that they want to do. All of these fantasies that have been promoted by certain bloggers who don't know what they're talking about but like to get hits, Brigham Young, about Google or Apple or Yahoo or whatever moving in. That's just a bunch of malarkey. But the property has been purchased by this corporation that does redevelopment of historic spaces back east mostly. And what they would like to do is put in a relatively small hotel, maybe about 200 rooms, put in some high-end retail. I think that's a fantasy, but a nice fantasy. It's certainly, if you're going to start converting to retail at street level, you probably want to make an effort. I don't really see Versace coming in to 8th and Broadway. Maybe down in Santee Court. And the most interesting thing, and the thing that I think would be most successful in that space, is a 2-story food court. I think a really good LA-style local eatery food court in that structure would be a terrific location. It would be a real foodie destination, and it's certainly an incredibly beautiful space. I was also, the thing that made me happiest about the press release, there were 2 things. One, they're talking about putting restaurants on the roof, and it's some of those beautiful views in the city because of the high quality of the buildings that surround it and the unusual opportunity to see them from about 10 stories up. And then they also highlighted the importance of that very early escalator in the building, which I was a little concerned might be lost, but it sounds like they treasure the escalator, and hopefully it'll be restored and we can ride it.
Okay, so just because we need to move on, these are, none of these ideas are new. This building is a bellwether indicator for that part of Broadway. So goes this building. So goes most of South Broadway. The biggest challenge that building has had over the several ownership changes it has seen in the last 30 years is the creation of an atrium. There are huge challenges to this atrium. One of which is that it's an historic cultural monument and you need sign-off from the city and support from preservation groups like the Conservancy, which have been involved with previous owners in discussions of how feasible this atrium would be, the cost of the atrium. So these are huge challenges these are non-trivial challenges facing this project. I know they're going to figure it out at some point, whether that's in 5 years or 10 years. We will just see, and we'll be here kvetching about it.
And I guess this is one place in which it's actually beneficial that the interior has turned into such a mess, and almost everything of historic quality has been stripped out, with the exception of that escalator. Because to actually punch an atrium through the building, it would be pretty hard to damage any of the historical elements of the building by doing so at this point. It's been pretty much nothing but sweatshop-style sewing studios for many years. And I don't know what's going on in the basement. The basement is especially interesting to me.
We don't know anything about the basement, and we're going to move on. We're not going to stop talking about the basement.
I have faith. I really believe this is going to happen. I think nobody spends $120-some million on a building unless they're serious about actually getting their money back. So let's wait and see.
I would disagree with that, but I believe that the owners are serious. But I just, your last statement I'm not going to concur with 100%, okay? It is just the real estate business after all. So Kim,
let's move on.
We're going to move on. Lava Sunday Salon, February 22, Dr. Paul Cordaro, Demonic Cats.
Cordaro. Even. I know. Boy, that's almost full. I think we have just a few reservations left on that one. It's going to be a very popular event. We're returning to the Lava Sunday Salon programs after a few months off because Broadway, so exciting, can't support a beautiful French restaurant like Figaro. Well, there were some issues there.
How sad were you Figaro was closed?
I was very sad Figaro was closed on the night on Broadway because I would have gone in and had some pastry and seen all our friends and used the bathroom. But you know, it's what it is. Anyway, if you want to join us at the Lava Sunday Salon, you will find it's a very different Sunday Salon than past ones. We are now starting at 2 p.m. instead of at noon. We are now over at the Library Bar behind the LA Public Library, which is opening special for us. That means when you get there, get some French fries or a cocktail or or a burger or perhaps a non-adult beverage if that's your tipple, because they are being really nice and opening early privately just for us. And the program is going to be split up into sections, so we'll have more time for mingling, and we're also not going to have a walking tour at the end of the event so people can hang around and get to know each other. It's going to be a much more social Lava experience, and I, for one, am looking forward to it. I may even have a cocktail.
Thank you, Kim. And our other Lava event coming up is our Spring Crime Lab, Sunday, March 15. It's not our crime lab. It's our forensic science seminar, hot lead and hot leads, forensic firearm, and gang communication analysis. Okay? It's going to be ballistics and gang homicide investigation. These are two great topics. One, one highly technical in the forensic end, real guts, physics, science, and Nick Guskos's talk is going to be more sort of
Psyops.
Yeah, more like you need to be a really good forensic investigator, but to solve gang homicides, you kind of also need to throw everything out the door that you learn as a normal forensic investigator. It's one of these. It's a master class. Yeah, it's a master class on an investigator with 20 plus under the belt, looking at some really tough stuff, and I think you'll really like his insights. And of course, Mike Kelly, our ballistics guy, he did that great talk about 2 years ago about Pat Tillman. Yeah, the friendly fire, the Army Ranger who was killed by friendly fire, and Mike, of course, was the guy that investigated that. So if the U.S. Pentagon thinks he's a good firearms inspector, I'm here to tell you he is. Kim, so let's move on to. I'm going to turn the page here and make a sound. Oh, paper. Oh yeah. All right. So interviews. So Larry. We're going to interview Larry second. I'll introduce him first. Okay. Larry's late father-in-law, Sal Cordaro. He is the founder of Dino Computers. Larry, his son-in-law, is co-owner. Dino Computers is one of. Okay. So first of all, you must break the Apple Store hegemony. You must break the Apple Store hegemony and go to Dino, because you don't want to go to the Apple Store. You want to support independent Apple dealers.
Where are they?
They're in Pasadena. They're in East Pasadena. They're really great. So we're going to talk about what have I done, Kim?
You haven't done anything, but they're down the street from a really good thrift store, so that's an incentive for the thrifters out there to schedule accordingly.
So Larry's father-in-law, Sal. Larry's father-in-law was the organist at the Trails restaurant for about 30 years. Okay, he was just obsessed with Hammond organs. He sold them, and in the mid-1980s, he bought an Apple computer, just set it up in the organ showroom. An engineer from JPL walked in, bought it on the.
It was earlier than that.
Yeah, 82. Yeah, it was 82, 83. An engineer from JPL just writes a check on the spot, walks out with it. He buys a couple more. He's selling computers. At that point, he's looking at going on 30 years almost at the Trails restaurant, 6 nights a week, and he just kind of lets that go because being an organist at a really fantastic cocktail bar in San Gabriel Valley in 1960 is very different than in 1980, and times and tastes are changing. And so we're just going to get this tremendous scope from Larry about his late father-in-law, who was a really important figure. The Trails, the former Trails restaurant, Duarte, Old Route 66, is very important. Our first interview is with Jason Golding. He is a city planner for the city of Duarte. He will be talking to us as a former, in the context of his former employer, the Trails restaurant. When he was a teenager, this was his first job, and so we're just going to get this great day in the life of someone working in the kitchen at the Trails in the mid-1980s. This is just after Sal left. I think he just kind of missed that. And so we're going to get some insight from him about commercial development, pre-World War II commercial development on Old Route 66, from his experiences as a city planner, who's a great local historian too. So just a lot of this is going to be a great interview, and let's take it away with my interview with Jason. Jason, we're here with you. We're on Huntington Drive in Duarte, and I need you to do 2 things immediately. Properly introduce yourself and locate us a little better than just on Huntington Drive in Duarte.
Sure. So my name is Jason, and I work now for the city of Duarte, but I'm a lifelong resident of our small town. Right here at the site of the former Trails restaurant is halfway between the San Gabriel River and Mount Olive Drive on the former Route 66.
Okay, perfect. Okay, and so, Jason, we're here to talk about the Trails on historic Route 66, and we're going to start with this as your first job. I'm sorry, maybe not your first, but let's just jump into that.
Yes, this was one of my first jobs. This is my first real job, I'll say. And it started with a group of friends, and one guy at 15 years old got a job as a busboy, and he ended up getting all of his jobs over the period of a couple years. This would have been 1988, 89, early 90s. And my job specifically was an expediter. I would take plates from the chefs, and if it were fish and chips, I'd put the tartar sauce and the lemon on the plate. If it were a roast beef, they would get the au jus and horseradish. And I did that for about 2 years up until I graduated high school and went into college. Fond memories of the trails. Had a lot of long-term employees. Had folks that had been working here since its inception or near its inception. One of the guys I can remember, his name was Andy. And Andy, at now it's 20-something years past that, but at the time Andy was pretty old. And I remember Andy would be a guy that would sit in the back and say, "Shut up, kids, and just go ahead and do your job. We run through you guys like Kleenex." So that was a kind of personalities you had there. I can remember all the owners, Edith and Buzz and his daughter Gayla, and this is the kind of job where you made $1.35 an hour. I remember one time asking for a nickel raise and was flat out told no. So you learn a little humility maybe as well in your first job. So
perfect. I need for you to give us a little context to the trails. This is obviously a very important location. We're interviewing you about it, but give us just a little history of the trails before we get into a later job you had as a city, as a planner, and so just give us a little context.
Sure. So the trails was one of the last great steakhouses along Route 66 in the San Gabriel Valley. And even when I was growing up, it was still kind of in that context one of the last great steakhouses. It used to sit in front of an area called Swiss Trails, which was run by the Swiss American Association, as what I recall it. And it was a banquet area, and it sat behind the property here until that was developed in the early 80s. But the Trails was a mixture of buildings that got put together over time. It was originally kind of Route 66 vernacular architecture. It had a small residential area on the side of it where Edith lived for her entire life. She never moved out of it. Where employees that worked here for a long time lived. My boss, Dan, who was probably 60 at the time, he lived there, and we used to go hang out in his house until we had to work. And it had a very large parking lot, I remember, with huge eucalyptus trees that would lift up the parking lot. So when you first, at 16 years old, and you get your first car and you come to work, you would want to jump them, right? You'd want to look at the roots pushing up the asphalt and jump these things. But today, in today's age, that would be a handicap hazard. But in those days, it was just fun.
Perfect. You mentioned this really interesting sort of adaptation over the years of the space. Restaurant, residence, commercial, residential. Are there any existing examples of this in Duarte that we can see?
Sure. Not examples that were restaurants, but, there is. Actually, Thai City, that sits just down a few hundred yards from here, is a restaurant that in the back has an apartment building, very small. It's right next to an auto repair place, which is next to a storage building. Zoning wasn't around, but I don't know if zoning was as important back then, but that's what a lot of Duarte looked like for many years. I think at one point Duarte had almost 25 motels, and there's one left from that era.
And that one is?
That's the Rancho Motel. Serves much more like an apartment than it does a motel these days, but that is indicative of what used to be up and down the boulevard. So people would go and, they bring their motor into their motor court, and they'd eat at restaurants like that, and they'd get their car service. And folks that used to work in them, probably many of them lived in the back of these businesses, and there's just a handful that remain on Huntington Drive.
The Rancho Inn is fantastic, and for people listening, this is a podcast, you can't see it, come out and look. The Rancho Inn is probably, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the last pre-war motor hotel complexes on this stretch of Route 66.
I would say that. There's also the Park Motel,
yes.
the one in Monrovia, right up through the city border?
That's been remodeled a little bit, though. I think people will not find it. That's been remodeled in the 80s and looks a little more modern, but yeah.
Very true. Yes, the Rancho pretty much has kept the same style that I would imagine it would have had 50 to 60 years ago.
Perfect. Okay. We have to do three more things, and I think we can combine two. I want to hear about your role in. Well, we need to talk about the demise of the trails. So why don't we just get to that? So let's the sad story of the trails as a restaurant comes to an end.
Sure. So in the early 2000s, when cities still had redevelopment powers, it's funny, the trails was actually intentionally left out when redevelopment project areas were established in the city. One of the few parcels, actually, that was carved out of redevelopment project areas that surrounded it, actually, because all the developments, as I look to the east here, were in a redevelopment project area, and so was across the street. That was done because Edith basically said, no, I'm not going to be put into this, and I'm going to own my business forever. As Edith got older and as her daughter, this is how I recall it, this is again probably 15 years after I had worked there and had become a city planner for Duarte, it became, under my estimation of what happened, Edith got finished doing the restaurant business, and she was approached by a developer that saw profit and opportunity to build 29 housing units here. The city had no part to play in its acquisition, but as a regulatory agency, of course, it would have the approval decision body to make a decision on subdividing and allowing the demolition and those types of things.
Building and safety would obviously step in at several points along the way of this life cycle of a development.
Correct, it did. And as we did permit history and research on the building, as I was saying earlier, it was an accumulation of different buildings that had been built over the years, and as Trails saw success, it built on. So it started with the bar, it started with the little room we called Hideaway, Crossroads, and Waterfall were the first ones, and then they added a bigger banquet room called Mesa. They also added on to the bar, and I think they even had a kitchen expansion at the end. So what happened is you see just kind of piecemeal additions onto the building, but yet it kept its facade and its main frontage that people saw as they would go up and down Route 66. And what happened as kind of a token memorial to the Trails restaurant is as we got through the process of going through the subdivision, and of course I got to handle processing this subdivision, which was ironic, I thought it'd be best that we name the streets after the rooms of the restaurant. And so if you go through the very small streets that sit here today, you'll see Crossroads and you'll see Waterfall and you'll see Trails. We didn't get a Mesa on here, though, because there's a Duarte Mesa, and that would have confused people. But that's how the streets got their name.
Perfect. Okay. I want to wrap up with a little discussion of the old timers and a day in the life, and maybe you can combine them into one. So let's give us, it's 1988, 89. You're working at the Trails, and just give us a day in the life of the Trails, and give us the year before you start.
Sure. So in 1988, 89, working here with my friends, a day in the life of the Trails would be one that you didn't have to put on a uniform, thank God. We would come to work. We weren't always the first people here, but we'd get ready for the dinner rush. And you would have the same cast of characters, the full-time employees, some of them living behind the restaurant, some of them living in other places. They'd be getting the restaurant ready for the meal ahead. Dinner was always the busiest. It really served as a supper house. It was not much of it served lunch, but it didn't do a lot of that. And you would see a lot of the cooks getting the meat ready, preparing different side dishes. There was generally 2 line cooks, and you would see 1 short order cook. Yeah, pretty good sized kitchen. And there would be Andy, who I was telling you about earlier, would always get the bread ready. He'd butter the bread. Jose in the back was our dishwasher. He stopped many tureens of vinegar and soup mixed together from entering into our waste stream. We had Gloria, one of the old-time short order cooks. She would prepare some of the salads. She'd do the cold food. She would deep fry a French fry for us. And we would all prep as the kids. Half of us were busboys in the front, which they had to wear the uniforms. Me in the back, just putting the tartar sauce on a plate. Didn't have to do that. So we'd get the plates, we'd put it on a tray, we'd funnel it out to the common area hallway, which was in between all these rooms I'm talking about, and the servers would come into the hallway to get the cart and bring it out. And I think the best thing I can remember is the unlimited soup and salad and bread. I mean, Olive Garden today might be where you get that, but back in the day when you got a good piece of cheese bread and you had all-you-want salad with the 3 different dressings in the carriage and a tureen of soup, if anyone still knows what a tureen, if they're under 20 years old, is, that's how it was. That's what I think a lot of people came for, not only for the good steak, but for the soup and the bread were just super hits.
Perfect. I think you did it. I think you did it. We're almost done. We did a great job. I want you to leave us with one memory of the trails for people to think about as we sign off. Take a second. Don't worry. Take a second.
I want to give a horrible story. I could do that. And if you don't like it, then we'll say something else.
Sure.
Okay. So, again, remember, I was 16 years old when I held this job. So, of course, we were pranksters. And as I was explaining about Jose, he was our dishwasher. And the trails kind of had a bad habit of one thing. They would recycle bread that wasn't eaten off, not off people's plates, but off the serving tray, and they would also recycle soup from the tureens for the next day's lunch. And we thought it'd be funny to say, hey, what if one of those tureens wasn't filled with soup, but was instead filled with something else we thought was funny? So we would clean the tables down at night with vinegar. And we decided one time after we had dipped a dirty rag with vinegar on 30 or 40 tables, we would have fill up the rest of the tureen of vinegar with soup and about 80 packets of Sweet and Low. And we'll see if it can get to the big vat of soup in the back, and we'll see if we can alter the taste, because we were working the next day and we're going to try it out. So us 3 kids laughed, and we cleaned the tables, and we bring it back to Jose, and Jose could see us peering around the corner, and I think that's what tipped him off. But the tureen got it all the way to him, and he picked it up to get ready to dump it in the big vat, and he stopped right. It was about to pour out, and he smelled it, and his head bolted back the other way, and he goes, you kids, I know what you were doing. And we ran the other way and laughed and giggled, but I'm sure glad no one had to eat that nasty concoction.
You did it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome.
This is Richard's mother, and I'm here at Whole Foods in Westwood, and you're listening to You Can't Eat the Sunshine. And remember to eat your vegetables.
Larry, we're here with you. We're at Dino Computers, my favorite computer store in Pasadena, and I need you to properly introduce yourself, and we're going to get to the work at hand.
My name's Larry Moon, and I'm currently one of the owners with my wife of Dino Computers.
Perfect. And your wife is, do you want to explain the special relationship your wife has to this store?
Well, my wife's name is Diane, and she has a sister named Noreen, and the company, Dino Computers, is after their 2 names, Diane and Noreen, and I'm married to the Diane, and we've been married 47 years, and we started dating in 1965.
I guess. Okay, so let's talk about not your wedding. Let's talk about your engagement. We're 6 months out from your wedding. It's a Saturday night. You guys are the wedding's not too close that you're totally tearing your hair out yet. Tell us what you did on a Saturday night typically, and this will bring in the subject of the podcast. Your father-in-law.
Right. Well, Diane and I dated, and once we got engaged, but before that, I used to go to their house for dinner a lot of times, and a lot of times we would go out to dinner. And during the planning stage of our wedding, on a Saturday night, we would go to the Trails restaurant. And Sal was employed at the Trails restaurant as a professional organ player and would play every evening except Monday nights at the Trails. And often we would go to dinner there on a Saturday night and have a great meal, and sometimes let's go into the bar and listen to Sal play on the organ. at the trails.
Perfect. Okay, and just to kind of bring everyone up to speed, will you properly introduce your father-in-law to us and all the different facets of his life, and then we can start to kind of pull everything together here.
Well, my father-in-law's name was Sal Cordaro, and he came over, his father came over actually from Italy, and they lived in New York, in Rochester, one of the towns. And Sal grew up there with his father having a grocery store, and he went to college there, and he worked his way through college by playing the Hammond organ. And he would play at the ice rink and other, venues that was offered to him. And that's how he got started. Worked his way all the way through college. He got a degree in chemical engineer. And when they moved out to California, he worked at one of the chemical companies along with, as a hobby, playing the organ.
And then, so at some point, the organ playing becomes his life. So do you want to just, and so let's use another milestone from your life to illustrate that. You're dating. Your wife and you are just dating. Give us a, I guess I am dating you. Give us a year. Tell us what high school you went to, and tell us about a dinner at your girlfriend's parents' house with a full night at the trails looming for her father.
Well, typically they had a very large family, being Italian, and they would have a lot of get-togethers at their home. And while Diane and I were dating, we often on a weekend, the whole family would get together, and we would have dinners at the house. But I would always, of course, dating, I would go by there several times during the week, and we'd have a nice dinner with Sal and Dolores, his wife, and, stay there and wash dishes and go for walks and that kind of thing. And Sal also was a very busy man. He not only was playing the Hammond organ at the Trails restaurant, he taught lessons at the house. So students would come over during the day, and he would teach them how to play the piano and the organ. And in addition, he really, really liked gadgetry, and he actually set up a recording studio in his house along with his very nice Hammond organ. He had a recording studio, and he would bring people in, and he would record them singing while he played, and other groups would come in. And he actually produced 6 full LP albums of himself playing the Hammond organ and sold them pretty successfully in some of the local markets.
And the name of that record label was?
It was Dino Records. Right.
All right, let's start to come back to computers, because I think we haven't focused on that since the beginning. Why don't it's 1978? Tell us about. So he's set this up. He's selling organs. He sees that there's this new product by a new company out. Did you just want to sort of tell us how he begins his career as an Apple retailer?
Yes, he was selling organs as a manager at the Hammond Organ Studio in Pasadena, and one of the people that worked with him bought an Apple computer and brought it in, and he saw this thing, and Sal just loved gadgets, and he fell in love with this immediately. And off the cuff, he said, we should start selling these things. So he bought one, an edition, and got it up there and fell in love with it. And while he was using it, an engineer from JPL walked in and saw it and said, where can I get one of those? And Sal said, I can sell you one. And he was immediately now in the business. They got an authorization, one of the oldest, in fact, the oldest authorization now in the United States of Apple computer.
Let's talk about that fact right now. Let's sort of jump out of this, because not a lot of, the Apple Store is a ubiquity in the world. Apple likes to sell their computers through their store, but you guys have this author. That's kind of amazing.
Well, this is way, way before the Apple stores, the Apple retail stores. There were independent Apple dealers. And Sal started his business in March of 1978, was the first authorized dealer in the state of California. There was one other dealer in Minneapolis that started 4 months before us, and it was TechUserve. And they started, but they have gone out of business. So we are now officially the oldest Apple store in the United States, and probably the world, to be honest with you, because he didn't distribute anywhere until here. So, yeah, it was quite a unique thing. And he signed his dealer agreement, and he would drive down to Orange County and pick them up at the warehouse every week or so and sell them. And his business started growing so much faster than the organ business, or selling the organs, that he finally found himself so busy doing that he actually left that location and leased a building 3 blocks away up the street and started selling computers out of there. And that business, of course, grew. Apple computers started getting more and more popular and grew and grew and grew to where it is today, actually. And then the Apple retail stores finally started opening up.
Yeah.
And they took a hit on us at first, but the things that we offered were things that the Apple Store didn't, like support, service, and repairs and stuff like that. So that's why we managed to stay in business.
Shameless plug for you. This is the greatest Apple computer store in the world. Okay, I don't actually know any computer stores outside the United States, and I don't care. But everyone should come here. This should become everyone's Apple computer store. It's really the best.
We still have customers that come in that remember Sal. And they actually say, I remember buying my first Apple IIe, and Sal was there. And yes, we've had that kind of loyalty from our customers. And it's mainly because of the service we do, yes.
You guys are great. So it's picking up. Let's wrap this up. The trails. At some point, business as an authorized Apple dealer is so good. There's not enough time in the day for 6 hours, 6 nights a week at the trails. So do you just want to sort of bring us into that fade out, and then we'll just wrap this up?
Yeah, I think what happened was, I'm trying to remember back, but it's quite a while ago, that he did start getting so busy, and I think the organ music was changing a lot at that time. Different kinds of music, different people wanting different kinds of music, and the owners, I think, were thinking of bringing some other stuff in. So it changed. The business model changed for them a little bit, and Sal was so busy that he really couldn't do both. And the computer business was doing so well, and he was so happy at that I think he made that 100% move right into the retail business.
Okay, we're going to wrap this up. Before we do, I want you to tell us one of his favorite songs he used to play, or one of your favorite songs that he used to play. One of your favorite songs your father-in-law would play when you were at the trails.
I would say my favorite song was something from, and he did play this, was a song called Al de La. It was an Italian movie. It came from the Rome Adventure movie way back in the 64, 65.
I'll look this up.
Al de La, Emilio Pericoli or something like that, and it was very Italian. And yeah, you should look that up. It's a good movie.
All right, Larry, I want you to bring us on home, properly introduce yourself again, remind everyone where they can get their Apple computer service, because we're the best Apple store in the world, and I'm so glad we were able to do this interview.
Thank you. Again, my name is Larry Moon. I'm the owner of Dino Computers in Pasadena, and we are the oldest store, Apple retail store in the United States, independent.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My name is Craig Berry. I'm in Venice, California, and you're listening to You Can't Eat the Sunshine.
And we're done. I'd like to thank everyone for listening to our podcast, You Can't Eat the Sunshine, for the week of February 9th, 2015. Our guests this week were Jason Golding, city planner for the city of Duarte, former employee at the Trails restaurant as a youth, and Larry Moon. He is co-owner of Dino Computers. His late father-in-law, Sal, was the organist at the Trails for about 30 years. And it was just great to walk down the path of the Trails and Old Route 66. So we're so happy you tuned in. We want to encourage you to continue to listen. And Kim, the feedback loop.
Yes, the feedback loop. That's how you let us know what you think of the show. You can send us an email at youcan'teatthesunshine@gmail.com or through a contact link at www.esotouric.com. You can come and see us on an Esotouric bus adventure, of which there is one almost every Saturday through the year, or at one of the lava events that Richard and I host, like, for instance, the Sunday Salons, now back on the calendar in February, or one of the Crime Lab seminars. How's that? I kind of mixed the two names that we fight about. So you can also, if you're so inclined, review us on whatever podcasting app or site you use. That might include iTunes or Stitcher or so forth. We're all over the place. Find us, share us. We appreciate it.
Good. Did it. Okay. Kim, upcoming bus tours. Take us home.
All right, we've got a bunch of bus adventures coming up. This month, we've got tours in the California Culture Series, and these include our Route 66 road trip, subtitled Roadside Architecture, Citrus Drive-Ins and Cemeteries. That's a Valentine's Day trip, and it is back on the calendar after a hiatus because the Aztec Hotel closed, and they're still closed. And at a certain point, you just have to say, you know, the Aztec is so beautiful, it's worth seeing from the outside. It really is.
If only just from the outside.
If only just from the outside. We got a lot of photos of the interior, too. So the tour is back. It's going to be a hoot. We're also going to go to the Waldo Ward Jam outlet, where you can see how they make the jam, and they have been doing so for about 5 generations now. Very special place. And we'll also, nooks and crannies, and I think Richard's going to sing the bungalow song. On the 21st, though, of February, you definitely want to pay attention to this. The Lowdown on Downtown tour, which our most changeable tour because downtown changes so much. Mutable, thank you, mutable. We have some really special stuff lined up for this edition. We are going into the Dutch Chocolate Shop, which has undergone some changes. We'll be sharing those on the tour. We are going to have, we're going into the Spring Arcade. I mentioned that earlier, and we're going to support Gelateria Uli by going and having complimentary gelato. That's on us, and you can check out that beautiful space and enjoy the custom creations that they are making on site. We're also going to go and visit Heath Sato's sculpture studio. He makes large format metal sculpture, and look at the history of the Arts District through the eyes of Carlton Davis.
We have dinner with Keith and Angel next week.
Good. We're Gordon Pattison. That's for our calendar, not for our podcast listeners. Gordon Pattison, Bunker Hill native son, is going to be along for the ride. We're going to meet Amos from Streetwise LA. You may have seen his big Reddit video that went through the roof last week with Senior Lead Officer Dion Joseph of Skid Row. Yeah, we have some really interesting people joining us, so get on that bus. It's going to be a really good time. And we're wrapping up the month of February with Wild Wild West Side, a crime bus tour about cults and oh boy, murder, lots of murder, child abuse, Synanon, serial killers, bad things that happen. Good things that happen, too, because I get inspired to write novels based on one of these crimes. That would be the Grade 11 craze. And I've got some new Grade 11 locations to share, so if you're obsessed, as I am, with the taxi dancing sirens and the bringing back of young women from the dead, you're going to like that tour. I like that tour. Moving into March, we have Weird West Adams on March the 7th, a tour about a really lovely neighborhood bisected by the 10 freeway and all of the ghastly activities that took place therein. We're going to go through Rosedale Cemetery. No, it's officially called Angelus Rosedale. I like to use the old names. And we're going to talk about housing covenants and how the laws and restrictions on selling property that used to create a racial divide in this country were broken in part because of what people in West Adams chose to do. Got a week off there, and then we're back on March the 21st with Pasadena Confidential with Crimebo the Clown, a tour about black magic, sex orgies, rocket science, presidential assassins, and the very real possibility that the Arroyo is accursed, and that's why Suicide Bridge attracts all those suicides. And, of course, Crimebo the Clown will be there to caper with us, too. On March the 28th, it is my brand new tour. It's a crime bus, but it's also an architecture tour. Hollywood, with an exclamation point, a celebration of my hometown and all of the weird, wacky, wonderful, and rather horrible things that happen there. The things I think about as I tool around Hollywood, which are probably not the things most tour guides think about. And I know you're going to love the cases that we've uncovered for you. like the Capitol Records carpool killing. And also, you're going to love seeing these incredible historic sites that we're going to walk through and talk about, like, for instance, Crossroads of the World and the Chateau Élysée. So that brings us up through March. I'll also remind you that our once-a-year Tom Waits-themed bus tour is coming up in May. That's about the size of it. We'd love to see you on the bus.
Thank you, Kim, for bringing us home. I want to thank everyone at home for listening, and I want to remind you,
you can't eat the sunshine.
You can't eat the sunshine, but you can make a beeline for the best of the coastline. La 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 la. Skid Row, Solano Canyon, the Doria, and Pico Union, the long-lost neighborhood called Hermina, between South Pass and Highland Park, Grand Central Park. It is divine. You can't eat the sunshine, but it's a gold mine.